Hey, it's Drybear. We're continuing our series of covering every specialization in Dragonflight, and today we're going to be talking about the Resto Shaman played in Mythic Plus. I'll have all the builds talked about down in the description as strings that you can import directly into your talent setup in-game so you're ready to go, and we'll talk about how to play it and what to look out for. As always, if you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Come by and say hi. All right, let's talk Restoration Shaman in Mythic Plus. If you're looking for the raid version of this for Vault in the Carnets and beyond, I'll link that down in the description as well as a separate guide going over raid encounters for Restoration Shaman. But today we're going to talk about Mythic Plus. And Mythic Plus for Resto Shaman was actually insanely good in Shadowlands. It's been a bit of a bumpy road for Resto Shaman in Season 1 for Dragonflight. If you can play it well and you can manage your global cooldowns and your totems properly and time things well, they can be super strong. They have a decent set bonus and they can scale with gear just as well as any other healer. But they do currently in the state of balance get outclassed by some of the other specs that are just doing better. Although this is before 10.0.5 where they're getting a nice buff overall. So let's talk about the basic kit, the abilities you're going to be using, and then we'll go into builds to talk about that. Healing wise, and just in general, Shamans have the biggest toolkit of any class in the game right now. They have a very serious keybind crisis. There's just so many buttons. They're even removing a button for us in 10.0.5, which is pretty cool. The core of this is going to be Riptide. This is a mixture of a single target instant heal and heal over time. Pick a target, you cast on them, they get drowned in water. It does an instant heal, and then it will do a heal over time for, I believe, 18 seconds at base. And then you'll have that heal over time. You can interact with it. And there's other ways to interact with it as well. The Resto Shaman is one of the original healers in World of Warcraft, which means it has the typical mold that like Priest and Paladin have, which they have a super fast, high cost heal, which is their Healing Surge. It comes base kit for all Shaman specs. This one's really quick, but does not super efficient on mana. It's kind of like your emergency heal and has different procs that go with it. Then you get your slower cast, but more mana conserving healing wave. In most cases, you won't be really using Healing Surge in raid all that much, but in Mythic Plus, Healing Surge comes in clutch because there's times where you really need to pump single target spot healing to keep people up when there's just damage going out everywhere. You have an AoE ground target heal, Healing Rain. This one doesn't really bring a lot of healing inside of Mythic Plus outside of procs and other things, but we are getting Acid Rain, which in many specs you'll see this picked up. It does just dot damage. Every second inside the rain, you'll actually deal damage to targets inside, and it's getting a damage buff in 10.0.5, which is today after the making of this video. So hopefully that works out really well. In your class tree, you have Chain Heal. This is basically Chain Lightning, but a friendly version. You will target someone with Chain Heal, and then it'll heal that target and then bounce to other targets. Unless you're running High Tide, which I'm going to recommend. I think the best build for M+ right now and for Raid has High Tide, but it's a special playstyle that if you don't use it right, it can fall flat. Then you're not going to be casting Chain Heal all that much. It is very expensive on mana, and the healing can be minimal if you don't time it right and cast it on the right person, which we'll talk about in just a bit. One of your biggest contributors to healing is going to be your Cloudburst totem. So normally you have a Healing Stream totem. This one you just place down if you don't have Cloudburst. It pulses healing for everyone in range. And in most content right now, you'll see Shamans running Cloudburst totem, which replaces Healing Stream totem. So that's gone, but Cloudburst is awesome. So what happens is when you place Cloudburst on the ground, it then starts collecting and gathering all the healing you do for its duration. So as you heal, you can see by my marker here, you can see that the number on the Cloudburst marker, I have my weak aura. That's how much healing it's storing up. So as I'm filling it with healing and filling it with healing and filling it with healing, at the very end of it, it blows up and disperses all that healing in a big AoE. So you kind of have these big moments of big spending, and the Cloudburst takes over and gets a big AoE burst, and then you get back into the Cloudburst. There's also ways that you can use things like Totemic Recall to spawn the Cloudburst, then spawn another one, or do it back to back. But we'll talk about that when we get into the talent section. You also have Spirit Link Totem, which is one of the most useful abilities in the entire game, but it is very niche because when you place it on the ground, it only affects people inside this radius, which means that if you're in a spread out fight and not everyone's in it, it loses effectiveness. If only one person's in it, it does absolutely nothing. What this does is it connects the health values of everyone inside of it, which means that it sets everyone to the equal amount of percent HP so that it prevents individuals from dropping too low and dying, right? Especially when your tank is in it or everyone's standing in it, it redistributes the healing, which is super nice. And it just kind of reduces damage taken as well. So it's great in Mythic Plus, but it's hard when you're running a pug and people aren't stacking up. So you kind of have to be really careful about it. Generally, as the Resto Shaman, make sure you're always standing in it. So it's on cooldown right now, but kind of just make sure that when you cast it down on the ground, that you stand in it because you're using your health pool as a buffer for everyone else that's inside of it. And make sure it's on the tank and the melee, and hopefully the people that are outside of it see that it's up and come running in to get full value out of it. Healing Tide Totem is your raid cooldown. It's just getting buffed in 10.0.5 to do double the healing that it does right now. You put this down and it just pulses healing. It's basically a super healing stream totem. It just pulses healing and it's getting doubled in this patch. So that's super cool. They'll use this basically kind of like pad the numbers a little bit. You can pop down like a cloud burst and then healing stream or healing tide and just fill it up that way. And it's a good way to kind of help buffer. This won't really save people, although we'll see with the doubled healing that it gets in the next patch how that scales up. But it is something to keep in mind because it does give you some nice healing. You want to pop it early because it does last for 10 seconds and you want to get full value out of that healing. You also have Primordial Wave. Almost every build runs this. This one is from Shadowlands. It's a single target. You cast it on the target, it will put Riptide on them, and then it'll give you a time window, which I have tracked on my weak aura here. When you cast Healing Wave next, it will heal everyone that has Riptide on them. So you want to be using Riptide regularly, spreading it around to make sure you have it on everybody. And ideally you have it on all 5 people in Mythic Plus. And then when you Primordial Wave into a Healing Wave, which is your slower heal, it'll distribute a portion of that to everyone else that has Riptide, which is super cool. In some builds, you run Downpour. Not every build runs Downpour. This is a Legion ability, ground target, cast. It goes boom, big heal. And then it goes on cooldown based on how many people it healed, which is, it's quite flexible. You can cast on the tank. You can even use it for Unleash Life, which is really nice. It heals more allies, but that's not useful in Mythic Plus in general. And then for self buffs, you have Earth Living Weapon. Amazing thing to have back in this expansion. It's just a buff. It buffs your weapon. You have Earth Living on it. And then you just pop healing. It'll just provide more healing. It's not something you have to actively think about, but it's something that you have to be aware of. Cooldowns wise, you have Ascendance. Super good. Amazing. There's a couple things about Ascendance to know about. You have, when you activate it, you transform and you see this area that's around me, it will pulse out a big burst of healing. So remember that when you activate Ascendance, this is different than other healer cooldowns. There is a burst of healing that's distributed. So you can actually pop it to heal people, so don't pop it when everyone's full. And then while Ascendance is active, it will distribute your healing all around for the next 15 seconds. So big major cooldown. You can line that up with Cloud Burst, get some AoE heals going. Maybe you can Healing Tide, then pop Ascendance and you blow. Lots of healing. That extra healing gets distributed and stacks inside your Cloud Burst. Then the Cloud Burst pops off as this cooldown is going down. And you can, you kind of have to keep that rhythm moving and going. On the class side, the other cooldown you want to use is Ancestral Guidance. This is like a mini Chi-Ji / Avenging Crusader. You activate this and 25% of your damage and healing is converted up to healing onto nearby targets in raid or in party. In this case, it'll be for party. I would lean on using this more than others, kind of keep this on cooldown because it's super good. And also you can pop it, and then you can start dealing damage, which is excellent for M+. And that damage will actually be distributed to healing to nearby targets. So if it's like minor damage going out, you can pop your Ancestral Guidance and then just Chain Lightning or Stormkeeper or throw out Lava Bursts, and then you'll get some splash healing that goes out to targets that are nearby, which can be super, super useful. Now let's talk about specific builds, and I'll have the talent builds down in the description. You can just grab those. It'll be like a little string. You copy it. Once you have it copied, you import it, give it a name, and it'll put this build directly into your setup. There's two main builds that I would say are kind of meta right now. I personally think that the High Tide build is superior. You can get literally you can get chain heals that full heal the whole party. If you plan it out right and you do it at the right time during High Tide, you can get some insane burst healing out of it. But things have to line up and you have to be prepared for it. There's also another build that you could use. There's a Primal Core build, which relies on Riptide. And you can also play around with, some people are playing with Ever Rising Tide. I've tested a bunch on doing like a continuous waves build where you do a shorter cooldown on Primordial Wave and trying to do AoE healing that way. Then you run like Ever Rising Tide, which gives you haste, but stops your mana regeneration for 8 seconds. And then you just try to spam and build it up. But honestly, I feel like, especially in M+, Primal Tide Core, it gets you extra Riptides. I feel like if you're managing your Riptide properly, you don't need the extra Riptides, and you're missing out on a lot of healing from High Tide. And I've tried the continuous waves build many times in Mythic Plus, and I think it's just inferior. So I will have the Primal Core build down below in the description if you want to pick it up and try it yourself. And then we'll talk mostly about the High Tide build. There's a lot of different talents you can swap around here for this build in general. So first, let's start talking about what High Tide is and why it's so good. Then we'll talk about all the different changes. Like you can end up picking up Earthen Wall. You can go for Water Shield or not. You might need Capacitor Totem for AoE stun in some situations. You may even go for Totemic Recall, which changes how you play on this side of the tree. There's a lot of things to talk about there. But let's start with what High Tide is. So High Tide is every 100,000 mana that you spend activates High Tide and makes your next 2 chain heals heal for an additional 10% and not reduce with each jump. So chain heal heals a target and then jumps to the 4 most injured nearby targets, and each time it jumps, the healing that it does is reduced by 30%. But for 2 chain heals when you activate High Tide, its healing is increased and it doesn't reduce with each jump, which means that every person that gets hit by the chain heal in High Tide gets the same amount of healing, and you can cook that quite substantially. You can activate special trinkets, racials, things like that. You can get a really big one. You can even run with Unleash Life into chain heal as well, which gives increased healing on top of that. And the trick with running High Tide is to use your mastery the best that you can. So you have a mastery of you heal more on a target that's low HP. So if you have 5 targets and you know you have High Tide activated, you want to target the person that has the lowest percentage of HP to be the first person that gets hit by the chain heal, because that will scale the entire chain heal for everyone that gets hit by it. And that's what I mean is if you have procs up and you have things stacked up and you have like a cloudburst down, and I have a weak aura here that I can put in the description that tracks when High Tide's about to proc, and you can proc your High Tide, and then when High Tide's ready, you can Unleash Life, pop something up, and then just do a big, fat, massive chain heal, which hits the whole party. And then, so here we go, High Tide activates, and now I have my next 2 chain heals do that, and they can just be absolutely massive. And of course, you can stack them up, like I said, with Cloud Burst to fill that up with more healing, then that pops, and you get more healing out of that. And you can even use it inside of Ascendant, so the big chain heals then duplicate their healing. Same thing goes for Ancestral Guidance, since these are percentage-based, right, based on the value that you have. So all of that works really, really well together. So managing your High Tide is big. So the general gameplay is you kind of throwing out your Riptides, keeping people stacked up, throw down Healing Rain if there's nothing going on and you have a chance to do a little bit of acid rain damage, plus some minor ticking healing. And then you want to keep up your Earth Shield on the tank, or someone, this is kind of advanced, but if there's like in Ruby Life Pools, there's a living bomb going off or someone gets a big dot, you can switch your Earth Shield over to them to give them a little bit more healing so that they can stay up, and then you switch it back to the tank. If you're worried about that, you can just keep it on the tank. And then you're just kind of throwing out these. If you're running the Downpour, then you use that as a big burst on melee and the tank, sometimes on yourself as well. It can be super valuable. And then you'll just want to be casting Healing Surge, basically. Unless you have Primordial Wave and you cast that for Healing Wave, or the damage is only on one person, you're going to be burning mana like crazy just using Healing Surge, because it's just so incredibly good. So that's the value you get out of that. Now, since you're going to be spending mana like crazy going through chain heals and healing surges, This build, this one that I have down here, my normal high tide build, does run Water Shield plus Resurgence, which gives you just mana back, which is super nice. And this one does not have Cap Totem or Earthen Wall in it. So there's an alternate build that I have. It's my high tide Cap Totem build, which is very similar. It just swaps some things out so that we can get more value out of that. You can see that we lose Totemic Focus. We get a Thundershock on Thunderstorm. This is like my CC build. Thunderstorm is a AoE knockback that can help pull mobs out of Sanguine or can help keep mobs from moving forward. It can knock Spiteful back away from someone that's being chased. So this is like your CC heavy build. You run Thunderstorm with the reduction, and then you also run Cap Totem just so you can have that extra stun on targets. And then I do actually have this Earthen Wall as well, which is super nice. You can put it down and it's just an absorb shield essentially for everyone that's standing in the area. You can put this down with an AoE that makes people see it better, and you get some value out of that. To get Earthen Wall down over on this side, you do lose Water Shield, but you can pick up Mana Tide, which can also be pretty useful. You stand near it and it gives you mana. Pretty cool. Another crucial factor is going to be managing your tidal waves. So what this is when you Riptide a target, it gives you 2 stacks of tidal waves. You Riptide someone and it'll give you 2 stacks of tidal waves, which makes the cast time of your next healing wave or chain heal reduced by 20%, and then it makes the crit chance of your next healing surge increased by 30%. You're not always going to be able to use these properly, like in small to medium amounts of damage. You Riptide, use 2 tidal wave surge or tidal wave procs, Riptide 2, Riptide 2. When damage is really heavy, you won't be able to use the globals as efficiently as that, but be aware that you'll have some value coming out of this. The extra crit on healing surge can help you a lot, especially with your mastery. If someone's really low and you healing surge them and it crits and your mastery scales it, you can get a really big single target heal. You also have Deluge up here, which means that you increase your healing when you're healing a target that has Riptide. That's why it's so important to make sure that you have Riptide on cooldown. You're proccing it as often as you possibly can and keep it on as many targets because you have extra benefit that comes from that. Other useful things, because the utility on Shaman is out of this world. You want to use Nature's Swiftness. It's not as good as the Druid Nature's Swiftness because all it does is give you an instant cast, but you can activate it and it makes your next cast instant. This works with Healing Rain. It works with Downpour. Any of those spells that you can use if you really need to get it out. You can do Chain Heal as well inside High Tide. It doesn't have any scaling like the Druid one, but it takes the mana off of it, which is super nice for things like Chain Heal, so on and so forth. You have several useful utility items in here. One of them is going to be Windrush Totem. This one is a ground target totem. You place it on the ground, and then when you activate it, anyone that walks through it can get movement speed. This is useful for spread fights where people need to move around a lot, or if you're just trying to go fast, which generally in Mythic Plus you are. You can also run Earth Grab Totem. This is useful for like the ads on the last stage of Halls of Valor when you want to keep the ancestors from moving forward. You can also use it for Spiteful. You can keep mobs in one place. If you know something's not going to be attacked, you just want to root them there. Extra useful. A nice one to pick up and utilize. There's also Tremor Totem, which doesn't have that much use this season. There are some nasty fears in Temple of Jade Serpent. So you pop this down, it will pulse and remove fear, charm, and sleep from people. Can be super useful. There's actually even an Algathar Academy pull that this can be useful on. It's just usually not worth picking up for the extra point. And then you can also run Hex, which is a single target transformation CC on humanoids and beasts. So on some pulls, you can use this for like really high keys. If you want to CC something and you don't have someone in your group that can do it, you have Hex. Keep in mind that you have literally the best interrupt in the entire game. It is a ranged interrupt with Wind Shear, and it's on a 12-second cooldown, which is the cooldown length that Melee have. Wind Shear is just the best. It's insanely good. You want to pick this up and you want to use it on cooldown. You can very easily be the #1 interrupter in the whole dungeon because you're just on this 12-second cooldown, just interrupting. So learn to master this. And that's basically the healing setup for Resto Shaman and M+. So the basics here are keep your Riptide on cooldown. Make sure you're spreading it out as much as you can. Use your Tidal Wave procs if you can on like Chain Heal, Healing Wave, or Healing Surge. Make sure you are putting down your Cloudburst. Don't let Cloudburst sit at 2 stacks. And don't be afraid to use Cloudburst. I see a lot of new Resto Shaman players that just let it sit because they're trying to get the perfect Cloudburst. Any Cloudburst is better than no Cloudburst. So you put it down, even if you didn't fully stack it, It's a nice little bit there. You don't want it to sit out on 2 charges, not being utilized at all. Keep your Earth Shield up on the main target, and then Riptide, Riptide, Riptide. If things are low, you can just do Healing Rain and throw out your Healing Wave on low mana. If things get crazy, you can start throwing out Healing Surges. And then when you build up enough mana spent to get a high tide, that's when you want to, throw down you can throw down your Cloudburst, Healing Surge, or Healing Tide Totem. Throw out some really big chain heals. Then throw out your Primordial Wave, Healing Wave right after it. And then you can throw down you just have so many buttons. It's crazy. So you can put them all down there and just stack it all up. A lot of it just comes with practice. If you're trying to master it, just use the buttons, press the buttons, and you'll get used to having it. You'll actually start to notice that as you get into a rhythm with Resto Shaman, you'll be able to start knowing that your Cloudburst is about to pop. You'll save, you'll stop spending high on Healing Surges and Chain Heals. Let the Cloudburst pop, do some damage. You can pop up your Ancestral Guidance, use damage, proc that, go back into healing. It's very flexible. The problem with Resto Shaman right now is just you have a lot of buttons and you have to learn how to use them. And if you miss globals, like actually pressing your buttons on time, it can hurt really bad. And I guess we'll close out the video with just basic DPS because you will be doing DPS as a healer in Mythic Plus. Super straightforward. Put Flame Shock on the target. Flame Shock as many targets as you possibly can. Keep that rolling. Then you Lava Burst. Lava Burst will crit always on a target that has Flame Shock on them. And then other than that, you're just going to be Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning, even without Flame Shock rolling, still can be one of your biggest contribution of damage. You can seriously help out your group if you're just Chain Lightning. And almost every Mythic Plus build runs Stormkeeper. It's a 1-minute cooldown. You activate it on the cast. Your next 2 nature spells are going to be instant cast and a little bit stronger, which is really cool. So you can do that, get some big damage out of that. And then basically in between your Chain Lightnings, throw out Riptide, spend your waves, go back to Chain Lightning. Make sure you keep Flame Shock rolling, especially on bosses. Try to use 1 charge of Lava Burst if you can. And then just kind of keep damage that way and keep rolling. And that is Resto Shaman. You also have, you're one of 2 healers that has Bloodlust. So keep that in mind. Make sure you learn the timings for Bloodlust, and that's it. Resto Shaman's super cool. They're actually quite good. They take a little bit more practice and, learning the rhythm to get it right. It's not as straightforward as some of the other healers that you might be just out of the box able to pick up and play. It relies a lot on managing your Cloudburst, getting your cooldowns right, and just, trust that if you play it more, you'll get into it, and then you'll just be insano. As always, if you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Thanks for stopping by.
If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.